to remember. Stories of people, of those we sometimes call strangers.
I just want to say, I just love it here, but I'd rather go away and not come back. So would Rose Steinberg and the Hemmerling boys than stand in the way of the Academy now.
Stories of human dignity and decency.
If you remember your history, one of the causes of the Revolutionary War was the tax on tea that England levied on the American colonies. It would certainly have been a good deal cheaper to pay that tax, which was small, than pay for the Revolutionary War.
We present Raymond Massey in Seasoned Timber by Dorothy Canfield Fisher, another story worth remembering.
For more than 180 years, Clifford Academy has stood in our town, peaceful and quiet like a tranquil stone in midstream. Clifford had not been touched by the turmoil of American history except for two incidents. One you know about, the Revolutionary War. The other, well, it happened just recently, and I'd like to think of it as a delayed battle of that same War of Independence. That's what I want to tell you about. Who am I? Oh, sorry, I should have introduced myself earlier. I'm the principal of the Academy, Professor Timothy Colton Hume, better known as Old T.C.
Some say haw, some say gee. The best ever is OTC.
Now I'll get on with my story. It all started when we learned that one of our three trustees had died. Mr. Wheaton was his name. He was a very wealthy man, had a summer place near our town. He wasn't born there, came later and spent just a few months out of the year with us. Mr. Dewey and Mr. Randolph, the other two trustees, were sitting in my office discussing the election of a new trustee to replace Mr. Wheaton. Come in.
How do you do? I'm looking for Professor Hume.
I'm Professor Hume.
My name's Beckridge, Professor, Stacy T. Beckridge. I represent the estate of the late Mr. George Henry Wheaton.
Oh, please come in, Mr. Beckridge. We were sorry to hear of Mr. Wheaton's death. Mr. Beckridge was a smooth, efficient man. He carried an expensive, shining briefcase, and he was impeccably groomed. I introduced him to the two trustees. He acknowledged their existence briefly.
Good to meet you, Mr. Dewey,
How do
Mr.
you
Randolph.
do? How do you do?
I'm glad you gentlemen are all here at one time. The deceased, George Henry Wheaton, made me executor of his estate. I have his will here, and with your permission, I'll read it to you, or at least that portion of it that concerns you. I, George Henry Wheaton, do hereby bequeath the sum of $1 million to the Clifford Academy.
$1 million?
By gosh, there's some good in the worst of us. Imagine Wheaton shelling out $1 million.
That's very good news, Mr. Beckridge. There are so many, many things Clifford Academy needs.
For instance, new gymnasium?
Be so good as to allow me to finish, please. The sum of $1 million to the Clifford Academy, providing that the name of Clifford Academy be changed to the George Henry Wheaton Preparatory School, and that all Jewish students be excluded from the rolls, that tuition be substantially raised to encourage only sons of good old-line families. I have appointed Stacy T. Beckridge as chief executive.
A sudden stillness fell upon all of us. George Wheaton had died, but he wasn't quite finished with Clifford Academy. What he didn't have time to do when he was alive, he was set to accomplish after his death.
What is your pleasure, gentlemen?
Mr. Beckridge, my wishes are against this sinful bequest. I can tell you right now, I vote against it.
Now, wait a minute, Dewey. You can't do that. There's $1 million involved. Think what it'll mean.
I didn't like Mr. Wheaton's fancy ideas when he was alive, and I don't like them now.
Well, now, hold on a minute. Suppose we do change the name of the school and raise the tuition. Might be a good idea. That isn't so important. And T.C., there aren't many Jewish students in the school, are there?
Well, let's see. There's the two Hemmerling boys. They're on the basketball team. Rose Steinberg, president of the junior class. And there's Jules Bernstein, plays the piano at the assemblies. Just 4, Mr. Randolph.
Hear that, Dewey? There's just 4 in the whole school. Now, you can't let a personal grudge against Mr. Wheaton stand in the way of the academy.
I'm against it. I don't like what it means.
Well, gentlemen, since there seems to be some disagreement, suppose you think it over very carefully and let me know whether you intend to accept the deceased's very generous bequest. You can get in touch with me in New York.
I was proud of Mr. Dewey. The harder Randolph worked on him, the more Dewey resisted. And the more Dewey resisted, the more convinced Randolph became that the Academy ought to accept the $1 million. It was obvious that whoever the townspeople were going to elect to take George Wheaton's place on the Board of Trustees was going to cast a deciding vote. The 2 candidates expressed themselves very clearly on the subject. Dr. Foote said,
I'm opposed to accepting this black money. If I'm elected trustee, I will most certainly vote against it, and I'm going to do my darndest to get myself elected.
Mr. Gardner of Gardner's Department Store, the other candidate, was no less definite.
Our school is badly in need of repairs. Expensive repairs. Our gymnasium's only a barn with a wood stove in it. The academy as it stands now is not a fit place to send our children. We have no right to turn down this bequest, no right at all.
Jules Bernstein, what in the world ailed you? You never played so badly.
Nothing, Miss Lavinia.
I used to be a concert pianist and a good one, and I won't be wasting my time. You've got talent, boy, but it doesn't mean a thing unless you work.
I shouldn't have come today, Miss Lavinia. I think I'll not take my lesson today.
Timothy Hume.
What is it, Aunt Lavinia?
Look at this boy. What's wrong with him? He's come here every day for a lesson, and today he doesn't want to take a lesson.
Is it George Wheaton, Jules? I thought so.
George Wheaton? George Wheaton's dead. What's he got to do with Jules?
I didn't want to tell you, Aunt Lavinia. Mr. Wheaton left a great deal of money to the Academy on condition that all Jewish students be denied admission.
That means that Jules would have to be sent away to some other school?
May I go now?
You may not. Now, you march right over to that piano. You're not thinking of accepting that money, Timothy Hume?
It's not up to me, but if the town votes to accept it, I'm sending in my resignation.
Oh, no, you can't do that, Professor. Clifford Academy can't go on without you.
They will if this town takes the money, but I'll move heaven and earth to see that that doesn't happen.
Good. Now that that's settled, suppose you get to work on that concerto, Jules Bernstein.
But it wasn't settled, not by a long shot. Mr. Dewey, Dr. Foote, Aunt Lavinia, and myself went to work to try to stop the movement to accept the Wheaton bequest. We spoke to everyone that would listen, but it didn't look good to us. In our town, we have the sort of people who keep their opinions to themselves. The last night before the election, almost the whole town came to a town meeting in the assembly hall of the academy.
And I say you can't back me off solid ground by calling solid ground a bad name. Don't you realize that no matter how bad a name you call $1 million, it's still $1 million? Mr. Wheaton has done us a favor. He's pushed our town of Clifford out of the sleepy past right smack into a modern world. Can we turn this down just for the sake of 4 Jewish students? My answer's no. Let's accept this bequest.
I'd like to ask Professor Hume a question. Professor, won't it be cheaper to pay the 4 Jewish students to go up to Ashley High and get all that money for the academy? Won't it, Professor?
Well, Martha, I'll answer it this way. If you remember your history, one of the causes of the Revolutionary War was the tax on tea that England put on the American colonies. It would certainly have been a good deal cheaper to pay that tax, which was small, than pay for the Revolutionary War.
May I ask Professor Hume a question? A certain newspaper that's come to my attention says that you've got Jewish blood in you. Nothing personal, but is that true?
It's not true. I'm neither proud of it nor regret it. It just happens that it isn't true. You know, in this country, we sometimes take quite a good deal for granted. It's as if we stood under a great stone arch called democracy that has always been here. And then somebody comes along and says he'll give us $1 million if we knock out one little stone in that arch. We never thought much about that stone. It's always been there. It's not very big, and $1 million is a lot of money. But pull that little stone, pull any stone out, and the whole arch comes tumbling down.
As I see it, there's no question of Jews or no Jews. In fact, it has nothing to do with Jews, except they happen to be the people Wheaton didn't like. Are we going to kowtow right in our own town to somebody's wishes just because he thought he'd got the money to buy what he wanted?
I just want to say it. I just love it here. But I'd rather go away and not come back. So would Rose Steinberg and the Hemmerling boys than stand in the way of the academy now.
There was no way of telling what the people of Clifford thought, and that $1 million seemed to be getting more and more attractive. But there's a woman in our town named Miss Peck. Her house is on one of the busiest streets, and in her front yard there's a huge boulder. It's a landmark in our town. The morning of the election, I noticed a group of people gathered about it. I went over and saw what Miss Peck had done. Embedded in the granite boulder was a bronze plaque that hadn't been there before. People were reading the clear, bold letters on it.
This is the town of Clifford, founded in 1767 by brave men who fought and risked their lives for
human rights. Their descendants faithfully carried forward the tradition of freedom, human dignity, and equal opportunity for all, handed down to them by
their hardy forefathers through more than 180 years of rigorous, honest living. And in the year 1948, when offered
$1 million to betray this tradition, they voted to...
There was space large enough for the word accept or reject. And after that, 2 words, the bribe.
Well, I declare, what a terrible thing to do, right in the heart of Clifford.
Well, it's Miss Peck's property. She can do as she wishes.
All this fuss over a few precious Jews, I don't think it's fitting. Not fitting at all.
On the election day, the people of Clifford came to the assembly hall and voted for the new trustee. I stood outside and watched them. Everyone came and voted in their usual way, quiet and tight-lipped. As soon as they cast their vote, they went home. It looked like a foregone conclusion, and no one lingered to find out the result. But when they finished counting the vote, the school won. Mr. Gardner was beaten badly, 215 to 13. Sure, the town voted not to accept Wheaton's $1 million. I should have had faith in these silent villages, in this sleepy town, far from the fuss of modern life. I should have known better than to doubt that these people would do the right thing. I should have known that on basic things they were as unmovable as that huge granite boulder in Miss Peck's front yard. Well, that's the story, and it looks to me as though it was just another battle in the War of Independence, except that we had to fight it and win it today.
Stories to Remember is a Lest We Forget presentation of the Institute for Democratic Education. It is offered as a reminder of this nation's promise of equal opportunity for all, regardless of color, creed, or national origin. Today's story starred Raymond Massey. It was adapted from Dorothy Canfield Fisher's novel, Seasoned Timber, published by Harcourt Brace and Company. The script was written by Sigmund Miller, directed by Earl McGill, and produced by Harold Franklin. Listen in again next week at the same time for another Story to Remember.